Okay, so what we're going to do this lesson is we're going to build a really kind of bare bones, simple Pokedex using the Pokemon API. Just to kind of practice using a slightly different way of calling APIs, we'll be using something called Axios rather than fetch like we looked at in a previous lesson. So the app is pretty simple. It doesn't look the best, but you can go and CSS this up if you like. Basically, we can go ahead and type the name of a Pokemon in here. So I'm just going to say Ditto for now. And when we hit Get Pokemon, we get the sprite or the little image of that Pokemon. We get its name, height, weight, the ID number, and any abilities that it can learn. Additionally, let's just have a look. If I say Pikachu here, and we get Pokemon, yep, we get the new updated and list of all of the abilities that it can learn. Right, let's crack on then. So we'll come back to the Poke API in a moment. But if you are using the starter code, this will all be set up for you already. You'll have your index.html with the scripts linked up, and you will have an init function on DOM content loaded in your app.js. If you would prefer to put these together yourself, go ahead. You should know what you're doing by now in that respect. So let's just have a go at trying to kind of call this Pokemon API using Axios. First of all, let's have a look at what Axios actually is. So if we just go ahead, and this link is down below, but if we have a look at the Axios HTTP website. Okay, so it's a promise-based HTTP client for the browser and Node.js. So you can use fetch just like in previous lessons. But one of the huge advantages to Axios is it works exactly the same way in the browser as it does in backend as well. So if you're making calls from your kind of backend server, and we'll be coming on to backend programming in some future lessons, you can use kind of the same code. It works exactly the same way. It doesn't matter whether you're using this in your front end or in your back end. And that's one of the huge kind of advantages of Axios. It's promise-based, just like fetches, so it won't kind of hold up your code if something's taking a long time to, an API is taking a long time to come back. But let's have a look at the get started at the get docs. So the fetch API uses kind of fetch in the browser, whereas Axios uses this, XML HTTP requests. We don't really need to know the difference between those. We just need to know that it kind of uses a slightly different protocol than fetch does. But it makes HTTP requests from Node.js, and it uses XML HTTP requests from the browser. But as far as we're concerned as developers, Axios works the same way on both of them. And it's got a load of other features that some of them exist within fetch, but some of them don't. And that's why Axios has become this kind of really popular library to use to make API calls. So there's a few ways that we can use it. And if we're, say, doing something with a React website, or we're doing some back-end programming, we can use this npm install Axios. And don't worry about that too much yet. We're going to get really good at that when we start looking at React in a few lessons' time. For now, though, we're just using what you might call kind of vanilla JS, vanilla JavaScript, where it's just HTML and JavaScript running on a browser rather than using a framework such as React. Now, for that reason, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to use one of these two options here. So a little bit like where we kind of import our scripts, our app.js into our HTML. We can also go ahead and import this bunch of scripts into our HTML. So let's actually go ahead and do that. Let's get Axios available to use in our JavaScript and in our HTML. So I'm going to use this one because I've used the JS Deliver CDN, and if you don't know what a CDN is, it just stands for Content Delivery Network, and what it means is that hopefully this code will get downloaded from a server that is nearby to you, so you're not having to request it from all the way across the world. If you're in the US or if you're in the East Coast of the US, you'll be downloading it from a server on the East Coast of the US. If you send your website to somebody in France, they will that website will then download it from a server in France. That's basically the kind of how a CDN works in a nutshell. You can use either of these. These are kind of exactly the same, but I'm going to use this JS Deliver CDN version. Okay, so I'm going to go and just move my screens around a little. And inside our HTML, we want to put that script tag and paste that script tag into here. Let me just move these around a little. So if I just paste this here, what this will do is when our HTML is kind of run, it will go ahead and download this code for us, and then it will kind of link up into our app.js. And it means that anything that's available to use in Axios will then also be available in our app.js. That's quite handy, right? The only thing that you do need to remember is that if you do this, you will likely run into problems because we'll be trying to use things from Axios, but it has not kind of appeared into our app.js yet. You might find that it works because of the way that things are downloaded in HTML, but this is the way that we need to be doing it. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and save that. Then I'm also just going to open this in Live Server just so that I've got this available. Now, let's see where it opens. Yep, it opens there. Fantastic. I'm just going to open our console because we are developing, so it kind of makes sense to be able to print things out to the console. And let's go ahead and make some API calls to the Pokemon API. So let's first of all have a look at the Poke API, and I have put a link again to this down below, where we can. One of the brilliant things about the Pokemon API is that they've made it super easy and simple to understand. In fact, on their homepage, they even have a place where you can just go ahead and try the API out for yourself. So what we can see here is if we make a request, and I'll tell you that this is a GET request, but we can go a little bit deeper in a moment to be 100% sure. We can make a GET request to this URL here, so to pokeapi.co/API/v2, or that's just version 2 of the API. And then we can go to a /endpoint of Pokemon, and then /ditto resource, or we could put any Pokemon that we like here. So I will say Bulbasaur here. Feel free to pick a Pokemon yourself. And if I submit that, you'll see that it actually comes back on the home page with the response from the API. Well, that's really handy, and really do not get used to documentation of APIs being this good and easy to understand. A lot of them try, for some reason, don't make it this nice and easy for you to test and to try them out. But the Pokemon API is a really good one in terms of ease of use. So great. So when we go ahead and kind of make a request to this Pokemon endpoint and request the resource Bulbasaur, we get this JSON. And if I just collapse some of these to make it kind of slightly easier to read, you'll see that we've got a bunch of properties on here. So we've got its height, we've got its ID, we've got, obviously the name is returned back to us because of course we could be searching for this Pokemon by its ID. And, you know, we want to get whatever Pokemon is named at ID 25, for example. We also have its weight. We've also got here URLs to the little sprite images that I showed you on kind of the mock-up of this Pokedex. Great, so that's all very well and good, it being here and on this website for us to try out. Let's actually go and have a look at the docs and see what they look like. Now, I will always say, if something isn't working or you want to learn how to use an API or a certain a certain library or whatever, absolutely go and read the docs. It's funny how often students come to me with questions that's on line 1 or 2 of the documentation. And the first thing that I'm going to say to people is, hey, did you go and read the docs? And if the answer is no, my next suggestion is going to be, well, maybe you should go and read the docs. Of course, it's sometimes not obvious where you need to be reading and where you need to be looking. In which case, go and read them and make sure you come back to us in your one-to-ones or on the Slack channels to say, hey, I don't really understand this. Can you kind of explain it to me, or can you go over what this might mean? And this is what I'm trying to do. But absolutely, absolutely go and read the documentation for whatever it is that you're using. Okay, so what I did there is I just on the left-hand side here, we've got the kind of all of the endpoints and resources that we can use with this API. So I went ahead and just clicked this Pokemon API, this Pokemon endpoint, sorry. And then what we want is just to get all of the information about a Pokemon. So all of that kind of top level information about it. So you can see here, it's got a nice little description of what you're going to get, what this resource and what this endpoint is. It says that we need to make a GET request to this URL here. So we need to say pokeapi.co/API/v2/Pokemon. So that's the endpoint that we're calling. And then we'll say / and then we can search by ID or name. Okay, that's really, really handy. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to go and copy this first part of the URL. We will leave this for now. We'll do a bit of testing with this in a bit, but we will just get this working for now, just with a static Pokemon. So let's go into our app.js. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and inside our init function, I'm going to say const URL equals, and then I'm going to put that string. Oh, it appears that I didn't actually copy it. So right-click copy or Command C or Control C. I'm just going to paste that there in the URL const that we've just. Next up, we need to actually go ahead and kind of call that API endpoint. So we saw from the Axios docs that it is a promise-based HTTP client, which means that we're going to need to do this in an asynchronous function. That's absolutely fine. So inside my init function here, I'm going to say async function. And then what should we call this? Let's say get Pokemon info. Yeah, I think that kind of makes sense. We don't need to give it any arguments just yet, or any parameters, sorry, just yet. And some curly brackets. Cool. So how do we make a request with Axios? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const, and we need to save kind of the response that we get from the API in a variable so that we can do something with it. So we can say here const response, because that's what it's going to be. And a lot of people kind of shorten this to res. Yeah, it's up to you. I'm going to say response. That makes more sense to me. And then we'll set that equal to Axios.get. And then we need to say where we want it to go to. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually just going to put in some backticks to make this a template literal. And this is going to get a little bit long. And I'm going to insert into here the URL using $curly brackets. And then we'll say, so it's Pokemon / and then the name of the Pokemon. So just for static sake, for now, we will come back and kind of change this later. But I'm going to just say Pikachu there, because it will be to /Pokemon / Pikachu. Okay, that's great. Now let's go ahead and console.log. Now the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that I have not done something yet, but we're going to talk about that in a moment so that you can see where lots of students do get quite unstuck. So we'll say console.log our response. So if I save this now, and we head over to our document, and we haven't actually called our function. No worries. Let's just down here say get Pokemon info and invoke it with our brackets. Okay, let's head over here. Okay, so something is happening, or something has happened, but we're getting this promise. So, of course, it's because our console.log is running before our get request has actually run. So what we need to do here is we need to just say await. And that's basically just saying, hey, hold on here until you're done and then carry on as normal. Okay, so let's see how that's worked. Fantastic. Okay, so we've got something different now. So if I drop down this bit of JSON data here, you'll see that we've got a bunch of information that doesn't necessarily make an awful lot of sense. We've got this config with adapter, env, headers. Okay, we'll come to this a little bit later. Yeah, we've got headers. We've got a status of 200. Well, that's brilliant because that means that everything went smoothly. So if we look in here in this data property that we've got on this, this response, you'll see that we've got, this looks very much like the Pokemon API. We've got ID and height and order, etc., etc. Yeah, we've got ID, height is somewhere. I'm sure I just can't see it. Height, there we go. We've got all of the data that we've seen here. Okay, so this is basically just an object. So we can drill down into this object and just extract this data from the response. So instead of saying console.log response, we will say console.log response.data. Okay, if we save that now. Okay, so we've only got the response and kind of what we're interested in to make our Pokedex. We've just got this data. Well, that's pretty fantastic. We've made the request to the Pokemon API, and we can now use that. We've got that saved into a variable, and we can do stuff with that. So let's get it so that we can, instead of just always getting Pikachu's data returned, we can actually give the user kind of the ability to type in the Pokemon that they require. So the way that we're going to do that is using just kind of a couple of little HTML elements. We'll use an input and a button, so that when the button is clicked, we take whatever's in the input box and we kind of hand that to our Axios call, which will then go and search the Pokemon database and come back with that data. So let's go ahead and create an input box, and let's also create a button. On this button, let's say get Pokemon info. We're going to be kind of utilizing these in our JavaScript. So whilst we could use query selector to and use some CSS selectors to kind of drill onto these specific elements. I think it's a lot easier if we just give them IDs. So we'll say ID equals, and I'm going to call this search box. And then this button, we'll give it an ID of search button. Let's say search BTN. Okay, that kind of makes sense. We should be able to use query selector to grab these elements in our app.js and then do something with them. Okay, so let's just save that and head over to our website. Brilliant, we've got those boxes. Of course, nothing happens when we click on them because we've not actually programmed anything to happen yet. Okay, so just like any DOM manipulation, what we're going to have to do is we're going to need to kind of grab those elements to then use them. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to say const search box equals document.query selector and then a string with a hash of our search box. Yep, don't make a typo like I just did. It's SEA, search box. And make sure that obviously this lines up with whatever the ID was that you gave in the HTML. We're going to need to do something for our search button. So I'm just going to quickly use Option Shift and down to copy this, this line down. I'm going to highlight this search box, use Command D to highlight both this search box and this search box, and then I'm going to go and type in search BTN. And you see I've changed those two things at once now. Okay, yes, while I was explaining it to you, it didn't take, it took a bit longer, but when you get used to using all of these shortcuts, you'll notice that you kind of speed up in your programming ability. Okay, so we've got those two elements now. Now, at the moment, we're just getting Pokemon info here. We don't want that to run all the time. We only want it to run when the search button is clicked. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to add an event listener, and then on a click, then we'll run our get Pokemon info function. So we can say here search btn dot add event listener, and then the event that we want is click, so we need a string of click. Then after that we will say what we will give it the callback function of the get Pokemon info. So get Pokemon info, and don't forget I am not adding parentheses here. Well, I did nearly just delete one that I do need. Great, so when we actually click this button, we should end up with this function running. Well, let's test it. We've done something, let's test it. So I'm just going to refresh the page here. Why is that happening like that? I know why. It's because I've not saved my app.js. Okay, so when I refresh this, we get no output into the console because we're not calling that API. But when I click this, then we get the Pikachu response. Fantastic. Now what we just need to do is to kind of say, hey, whatever is written in this box, go ahead and append that to the end of the URL rather than just making it always Pikachu. So what we can do is we can say inside here, we can say, let's split this out nicely. Let's make a function, a variable that will hold the Pokemon that we are searching for. So we can say const Pokemon to search, and we'll set this equal to the value of whatever is in this search box here. So we'll say search box dot value. Then what we need to do is we need to append this in place of this Pikachu string here. So I'll just get rid of that, and we will add $curly brackets and add in Pokemon to search. Okay, let's give that a go. So I'm going to save that now. And if we put in Ditto, I hit that, fantastic, we get Ditto returned to us. But if I search for a different Pokemon, so if I search for Growlithe, spelt correctly, and get Pokemon info, you'll see that we've now made another call and we get the Pokemon Growlithe. Fantastic. So in the next one, what we'll do is, in the next video, what we will do is actually start putting some of these this response onto our web page, because whilst we as developers are probably perfectly happy with seeing our data like this, most users like things to be set out in front of them quite nicely on a web page. So that's what we'll be doing in the next video.